Very much confident and pretty sure that we are on the verge of resolving this terrible crisis. We are prepared to have a deal, to use the word of President Trump, and my hope, keep fingers crossed, would be that it comes sooner rather than later.
That was Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov from Russia on ABC News last night in an interview that sparked a lot of optimism. And the reason why that was an optimistic, not only was it on American television, but it was also echoed throughout Europe. There was lots of meetings in Berlin yesterday, and actually the last couple of days. Friedrich Merz said he thinks that we're 90% of the way there. Lots of Western and American media in particular said that according to American officials, they are 90% of the way between what the U.S. and Russia are both willing to live with, and we are that close to a negotiated settlement. Or are we? Now, as you can imagine, 90% of what? And you can have like 100 different categories of things, and you can find 90 of them that say, yeah, I guess we can live with this. And the other says, yeah, I guess we can live with that. But it's that 10% that could be literally the most difficult one. Ordinarily, it's rationally and logically, you'd say, all right, let's get the stuff we can agree on first, and then let's keep those thornier issues to the side here, and let's work on those. So even if everybody was actually interested in bringing this to a negotiated settlement, it's going to be difficult. And that last 10%, even though you're 90% there, it could be a long, long way from being successful or bringing it to an actual end where everybody agrees to that final 10%, signatures are made, and then the guns go silent. But we have a situation here to where I don't think that there is an interest, actually, especially in two of the four parties. And when I say four parties, I'm talking specifically about Russia, the United States, Britain, Europe, and Ukraine. So those are the four primary players here. And there's no question in my mind that the United States and Russia actually want a negotiated settlement. They actually want to get this off the table, despite a lot of the claims that are made that Russia only wants to negotiate, or they want to drag out the negotiations so that they can keep fighting. That's ridiculous. That's absurd at face value. Nobody wants to just fight for fighting's sake. They want to fight to accomplish something. And if they can get that via negotiated means, that's logical and rational. Just because you hate Russia, don't apply to them some kind of irrational and illogic that doesn't even make sense, that nobody would do. Even evil and wicked people wouldn't do many of the things we ascribe to Russia. That is done intentionally, in my view, to make them sound irrational and that you can't actually make a deal with them because there's too many players, and that's primarily talking about many in Europe and in Ukraine that do not want this deal to pass, because they don't want to take the poison pills that go along with it. They don't want the terms. They want to continue to hold out for something that's better for them that they don't have the power to compel. They cannot, through everything that we have, and that even includes the United States, Europe, and Ukraine, all together, all the things that we have are cumulatively unable to compel Russia to comply to get the terms that we want. That is the biggest issue that is preventing this from having already gotten to a negotiated settlement. We've had so many chances. I've talked about them many times. Don't need to go back over them here, but you know that we're talking from 2021 all the way through this war, through last summer, and in this current phase, starting in this past summer, going up until this very day here. So the question is, are we really close to a negotiated settlement? Because at least people are talking. So that's also a good thing. You can't get to a settlement if you're not talking. So that's helpful on its own right. But I'm going to show you some things here that show why don't be, I guess, sucked into believing that, man, maybe we're close. Maybe we're right on the edge because the Russians are saying it. I mean, I just showed you that soundbite there from the ABC News piece last night. He started off his interview, yes, I think that there's a chance that we can, be close to this. You had Friedrich Merz saying it. Lots of people in the U.S. Administration have been leaked in media saying the same thing. But when you look at all of the things that are said, you realize that there are some still mountains to climb. And unfortunately, if those mountains are not scaled, if we don't figure out how to get past them, we are still right where we've been all along. And that is that Russia has the military capacity to compel compliance on their side, or they will simply take it militarily. That's where we have it. So that in that regard, nothing has changed here. Let me show you a few things. I'm going to show you just a few sound bites. And by the way, with Andrei Martyanov, we're going to have later this afternoon. We're going to do a whole show focused on all of the things Ryabkov said in that interview, because there's a lot of really important things. And I think if you're not careful, you might miss some of the meaning behind some of that. And it just shows you where the Russian side really is. So we'll have him. Colonel Doug McGregor is going to be talking about a lot of the European things. So I'm going to show you only one of those here in a few minutes. So a lot more to come. But I wanted to do the kind of this overview of where we are and why I want peace more than anybody can imagine, because it anguishes me to see the Ukrainian men suffer so egregiously, the Ukrainian people suffer so egregiously, and the destruction of the Ukrainian territory, cities, etc. So I want this to work, but we have to be unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you the truth. And this is what the truth is. So first of all, let's start with Russia, because right after saying, yes, there's a good chance for this to be successful, the interviewer asked him, what about the terms of the deal? What are you willing to agree to?
We do what we do. We want to stop it. And whether it would be stopped depends much on how people who support authorities in Kiev recognize the inevitable outcome of our success in this, either in form of our military success or a compromise, a deal which may be achieved through diplomatic means, which we currently are focused on. Since 2022, the Donbas region, the two republics there, became integral parts of the Russian Federation through referenda which were held there. This is what we have in terms of Donbas. Beyond this, similar things happened in Zaporozhye and Kherson Oblast. So we have 4 entities currently which are integral parts of the Russian Federation. I'm not talking on Crimea. This is a story which dates back to 2014, as we all remember. So we have 5 altogether, and we are not able in any form to compromise on this, because it would be, in our view, a revision of a very fundamental element of our statehood.
Okay, some really, really important things that he said there. That's probably the central, most important soundbite from that entire interview, because it tells you everything you need to know. As I have been saying, well, throughout this war, but certainly throughout this year, Russia's conditions haven't changed. June 2024, Russia keeps going back over and over to that. The 4 administrative borders of the 4 areas they annexed in 2022. That has not changed. You may recall that there was a lot of optimism flown around in Western media over the past several months that says, well, Russia has shown a willingness that they would say, all right, if the Ukraine side withdraws from the Donbas area in its totality, i.e. up to the administrative borders, then they would show some flexibility, and the current line of contact in Kherson and Zaporizhia might be acceptable. I had said many times that I thought that was really peculiar. I don't know why anyone would say that, because the Russians have been saying categorically from the beginning, and never said anything different, at least on an official level, that none of that was negotiable, that all that was already written into the Russian constitution. And it was, as he said here, an integral part, as they view it, of the Russian Federation. So that the view is that Putin doesn't have the right or the capacity to give away anything in Zaporizhia and Kherson. But yet that's what some people were hoping. They'd say, you got to be compromised. Both sides got to give a little bit to get a little bit. So they're saying, look, Russia will give something that they want in Zaporizhia and Kherson. Ukraine will give something that they want in the Donbas, and we'll find the happy medium. But as Sergei Ryabkov said there, no, there is no willingness to negotiate that. He said we can't. He said that it was we are not able to compromise on that. It's an integral part of the state of Russia, he says there, i.e. there's no change. They haven't changed anything on that. They've always been willing to work around the margins, what apparently is qualifying as a 90% agreement, according to many of the Western viewers. But Russia said on these core issues, they're not. Now, what has not even been addressed is the demilitarization and the denazification, which were also integral part of what Putin has set out, has repeated again this past summer. And I can't imagine that those things are changed. For example, I don't see, it would just be hard for me to see that Russia would give up from a position of strength to say, okay, all this stuff about denazification, don't worry about it. Yeah, as long as I get these territories, that'll be fine. You can stay in Zelenskyy and the Azov group and all these folks that we call Nazis, they can all stay there. That's fine. No problem. I just can't see that they'd say, well, if that's the price for us getting, the war over by negotiated means, I guess we'll pay it. It's theoretically possible. There's nothing wrong with asking for it. Hard for me to see how that's going to happen. This other issue about the demilitarization, what Russia had talked about earlier was an army in the size of 85,000. This goes back to I want to say the December 2021, that deal that was offered there. That's the last time I saw an actual number by the Russian side. Now then, people are saying apparently the 28-point peace plan by Trump included 600,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and then this revised one that Zelenskyy is pushing for, this 20-point plan, as for a ridiculous 800,000. Who's going to operate this 800,000 man army in peacetime? On a perpetual go forward basis. Who's going to pay for that? Ukraine could barely pay for a 220,000, I think, active force prior to the onset of this war here in 2022. And even that came with significant financial resources and help from the West. And so now you want to have something 3 to 4 times bigger than that. And who's going to pay for that? Because you're literally saying, all right, Europe, you guys are going to have to sign up indefinitely for tens of billions, maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars indefinitely to maintain a military of that size. Just consider the United States Army, the ground forces, are less than 500,000. And you want to give Ukraine 800,000. I mean, that's just absurd. I can't imagine any chance that Russia would agree to that, because that would compromise what they have said is their stated primary objective of this whole thing is the security on their western flank. And if you leave this massive organization out there, even if they found some way to pay for it, that is going to keep Russia at a concern and their security at risk. So I don't imagine them paying for that. That hadn't been mentioned yet in any of these alleged 90% things. So we'll see how that works out. But even just on what was mentioned here, that's pretty much non-negotiable, because unless Ukraine is willing to give in and say, all right, we'll just go ahead and give you all the land, we'll withdraw from all of that unilaterally in order to get peace. That's hard to see too. And if you had any doubts about how willing Zelenskyy is to give, that was eliminated at a speech he gave this morning.
That's exactly where the real path to peace begins. It's not enough to force Russia into a deal. It's not enough to make it stop killing. We must make Russia accept that there are rules in the world and that it cannot deceive everyone. This is the path to lasting peace. Ladies and gentlemen, together with partners, we are working not only to stop the bloodshed, but to change the situation along Russia's borders so there is no opportunity to start another war. And we understand that criminals don't change in a day. That's why the talks these days are not only about ceasefire, but about security guarantees. This is not only about diplomacy, not only about physical security. It's also about making Russia finally learn to live by the rule of law.
So, you're trying to come to a negotiated settlement. Again, last night, all kinds of news coming out of Berlin, a lot coming out of the United States media, that we are nearly there, man, 90% of the way there. All these things have been agreed to. So we're trying to get that last 10% agreed to. And then Zelenskyy pops out and he calls Russia criminals. He says the only path to lasting peace is to compel Russia. And it's not enough to compel them to do what we want. We also have to have security guarantees, etc. You just keep going down the list. Everything he said there was incendiary to Russian ears. By design, I feel confident. So just imagine, let's just take these things right here at face value at the moment. You have Russia with the balance of power up here. You have Ukraine and all of its supporters, to include the West, to include NATO, down here. So Russia has been, for whatever it is exactly, 24 months. Some of them like it 25 months, I think. They have been on an offensive. It has been slow and have been grinding, but it has been forward going to the West. Ukraine has been losing thousands of troops every month. They have been losing through desertion thousands of troops every month, and they're running low on people to replace them, and they can't force mobilize enough to offset the losses. That's the condition that speech was given. That you saw Sergei Ryabkov, very measured, very diplomatic, and saying, well, we want to make a deal, we want to work with this, but here's our non-negotiables. You didn't hear him demonize the Ukraine side there. You didn't hear him. In fact, elsewhere in that video, as you'll see later this afternoon, he actually praised the American side, said, we're grateful that they're trying to go down this track, and we're trying to find a negotiated settlement. That's what diplomats do. That is the literal definition of diplomacy. What then shall we call this? If this is, I'm going to, in your face, demonize the other side, the side that's on the power advantage, I'm going to tell them, we're going to force you to do what we want to do. And once you have met all my demands, then I suppose we'll give into something. That's obviously just like a red cape in front of a charging bull. Russia's not going to go along with that. I mean, who would? Can you imagine? Let's just use this a scenario that's not far off here. The United States is talking to Nicolas Maduro. We have all this force around in the Caribbean, and we could bring, rain down all kinds of fire and bombs and missiles from air power, et cetera. Maybe even could do some limited operations on the land. Maduro is nearly, well, I won't say he's powerless, but he is at a significant power disadvantage. Now, imagine if Maduro comes out and gets in your face and tells Trump, you're going to move these troops out of there. You're going to do it according to my terms. What are your questions? And can you imagine the United States going, okay, sure, we'll go ahead and do that. I mean, not just that we would, and of course, I hope we do, by the way, because I think that is a foolish thing for us to do. We should definitely not do it. But if Maduro thinks he's going to help his case out and comes out and makes this in-your-face comment that America is a criminal and that they have to go out and he'll decide what the conditions are going to be. He'll decide when we move our aircraft carriers and all that kind of stuff. Then Trump is almost certainly going to do the opposite. But Trump is definitely not going to move things out because of a threat by the guy on the power lower side. He's not going to do it. And that is only a partial analogy because the power imbalance in this case are actually much larger between the powerful side and the weak side, and they're physically in a war. And yet that's where Zelenskyy is. It almost gives you the impression he doesn't want this war to be over. He doesn't want to give in on anything. He doesn't want to reduce that last 10% because he still wants this magical outcome. I mean, there's really no more accurate way to put it. It's a magical outcome that I, from a position of weakness, want to demand and criminalize the side that's on the top. Obviously, you hate the Russians. I mean, Trump says that all the time since he's been in office here, and it's logical that you would do so. I mean, your country is being blown up, your people are being killed, your troops are being destroyed in the field. Why wouldn't you hate the other side that's doing that? I get that. And from your perspective, they're the criminal regime. I get that. But as I say, war doesn't care about your morality. It only cares about what you can do and what you can't do. And we love to moralize about a lot of things, and maybe there's a place for that in some aspects, but not when it comes to how the war is going to fold. And if your troops are on the weak side and you have a chance to bring this to an end and you choose to instead spit in the face of the other side and to demonize them, then what you were literally doing is leaving the only path for the Russian side to shrug their shoulders and just keep marching to the west until they end up having a military victory. Whether it takes a long time. One of the things that was asked also at Ryabkov in that interview by ABC News, they said, our analysis shows, or some UK analysis shows, that at the rate that you've gone and the rate that you would still have to go to accomplish all the things, it would take until 2028. And Ryabkov didn't actually deny that. He said, well, we have different calculations, but basically, even if it does, yeah, we'll do that because that's where we're going to go. He reiterated what Putin said: we will accomplish this diplomatically, or we will accomplish it militarily. So bottom line is none of that has changed. And if there was any thought that the Russians would be willing to compromise on some things, this speech makes it almost impossible and makes it much less likely. So one has to wonder, is that what the intention was? Especially that this came after all of these meetings in Berlin where all these European leaders were. I don't see anybody repudiating what he said. Ergo, I have to believe that they agree with it. And also yesterday, those two statements that were made by the UK. Now, the UK is central to this. UK, France, and Germany are the three leading military powers in Europe that have been staunchly behind Ukraine from the beginning and have literally given them carte blanche. So when you hear UK speak, that's kind of a bellwether for where the European military powers are. And when you see where these guys are, in light of all of these, starting yesterday with this alleged, down to 10% left, when you hear the statements that were coming out of the UK, you can go, yeah, I see where this is going too. Now, we're going to cover all this in some detail with Colonel McGregor starting in about an hour from now at 11 a.m., so tune in for that. But let me show you one of them by Air Marshal Knighton of the UK, who is telling his people, again, yesterday, instead of saying, hey, we're close to an end to this war, he's like saying, no, we're actually looking forward to the next conflict with Russia. And by the way, our people need to be ready to sacrifice.
That while the price of peace may be rising, the cost of strong deterrence is still far, far less than the cost of war. Sons and daughters, colleagues, veterans will all have a part to play, to build, to serve, and if necessary, to fight. And more families will know what sacrifice for our nation means.
What in the world are you talking about? Why are you calling on British sons and daughters and British families to sacrifice in a war with Russia? I mean, what the literal hell? And of course, you'll see where we're talking to Kaja Kallas, Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, certainly Merz. I mean, all of those folks are singing the same tune of that. So that is consistent. MI6 also yesterday made a similar statement. They're looking not to end this. They're looking to ramp up, and they're looking to a conflict. And I mean, this is more than just saying, hey, in order to deter from war, you have to be ready to fight. That's the whole nature of it. That's why people have militaries. That's a normal, common part of it. That's one of the mantras that used to be in the military when I served in the U.S. Army for 20-something years, is that we always said, hey, listen, we have to be ready to fight today. That used to be kind of our call sign, ready to fight today. Because you never know when you're going to be called on. Naturally, that's what you're supposed to do. That's normal. What's not normal, what's above that, is when you have the leaders going out in public and demonizing Russia and demonizing a specific enemy, and then telling everybody, your population, you need to be ready to sacrifice. Your sons, your daughters, your colleagues, you all need to be, your family needs to be ready to make this sacrifice. Why? This idea is bizarre and very dangerous, that Russia from way over there is going to be putting your sons and daughters at risk, i.e., if you don't do something quick, if we don't get ready, they're going to come get us. And the only way we can prevent that is we have to be ready to fight, but we may have to, so get ready to die. But how? I mean, fill in the blanks here, Air Marshal. How in the world do you argue that Russia is going to come get London? I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. Look, there's a whole continent in between you and Russia, and there is zero chance and zero rationality of why Russia would want to. Britain has nuclear weapons. Okay, this ain't 1939. No matter what kind of analogies a lot of people are trying to make right now, it's not 1939. In 1939, on the eve of World War II, you had two blocks. You had the Allies, and then you had the Germans and all their allies that they would later have with them. No nuclear weapons. Now then, there's nuclear weapons on both sides. Ergo, nobody is going to launch this big theater level combat operations with millions of troops flooding across open plains, et cetera, and investing cities and all this kind of stuff like happened in World War II in both directions throughout the course of that. That's not going to happen because nuclear weapons preclude that. That's why people have nuclear weapons, so that if they start losing conventionally, they bring that into. They're going to. UK would do it. France would do it. Russia would definitely do it if they start losing conventionally. So the only rational thing is don't fight a conventional war. Doesn't make any sense at all. Russia has no interest in it. And, you know, and it's also important to point out that these very same people who are telling you we have to be ready to sacrifice all this stuff to fight a war against Russia, then they'll also simultaneously tell you, mocking that same Russian conventional force that they say has only taken 1% of the territory in the past 2 years, and that it would take till 2028 for them to take the rest of Donbass and all that kind of stuff. And yet they're telling you that from 2022 to 2028, if everything just kept going on there, Russia would take the Donbass, except that you need to be able to lose your son and daughter. You need to be ready to fight this Russian menace that, oh my God, if we don't stop them here, they're coming to London. You know how odd and absurd that sounds? I mean, that is so just stupid. And yet, my friend, that is passing for elite in the Western world right now. That is. Watch later on today. We're going to show you a couple of sections. We're going to get into it to make sure you have the real deep dive on both of these topics here. But holy cow, that is a dangerous thing because nuclear weapons are involved here. And our leaders could be taking us in directions that could turn into conflict, even if it, quote, only went into a conventional fight right now. Why should anyone die for a war that is not needed, that a war that Russia's not going to fight? They had been saying for 15 years prior to this one that NATO and Ukraine and Georgia would equal conflict. And they were good to their word on both cases, but only on those cases. They never went to war against the Baltics. They never went to war against Romania. When NATO moved up into it, they never threatened to it. They said it was dangerous and destabilizing, but they never said they were going to go to war against it, and they didn't. The only thing they did is when they said they would, and they did. So if Russia does what it says, but doesn't do what it doesn't say, then why do you now want the whole continent to get ready to go fight a war to such that you're worried about telling everybody to get ready to sacrifice? It's just insane. And my hope is that enough of the population in these countries start to recognize the insanity of these leaders, and they, through the democratic process, get rid of them. Anyone who's advocating a war that should never be fought, it's a separate issue if we're talking about somebody attacked you or somebody's imminently attacked you and you have to defend yourself. That's what militaries are for. That's what you're supposed to do. That is a radically different thing than going out and seeking wars to fight, than going out and demonizing somebody to create the conditions under which they might spawn a war so that you can fight them, and you're trying to find any justification you can. That's dangerous, and that's what I'm talking about. And anyone who wants to lead in that direction deserves the full effort of a democratic process to get them voted out of office and get somebody in who's going to actually protect them and defend them and not unnecessarily seek conflict. That's what I think anyway. It's certainly what I advocate anywhere. United States included into that. If anybody wants to go down that path, I was all against it when previous administrations wanted to use military power anywhere else, or if Trump does in Venezuela, I'm totally against that and would stand totally without question in opposition there. That's what you need to know, folks. That's the overall view here. So I hope that peace somehow comes. I hope that a lot of these words by Zelenskyy and these Europeans turns out to just be blah, 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 but then they end up agreeing to something because at some point they realize the reality, the combat reality and the balance of power. But you need to be aware that if they don't, we're unintimidated and uncompromised to tell you the truth. So keep an eye on that, folks. Thank you very much. We will see you in about 45 minutes from now with Colonel Doug McGregor. We're going to be talking more about the Ukraine peace plan. Like an apple pie with no apples. Who knew that one? But yeah, take a look at that, folks. We'll see you in about 45 minutes on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.